Take 3. My first 2 takes, I made the mistake of flashing. I flashed the next test. Not only did I flash the next test with answers. So I went back and did it over after the first time and then redid it the second time and flashed the answers. So this is take 3. And if I mess this one up, I don't know what I'm going to do. At any rate, this one is going to be a shorter take, anyway, a shorter lesson a day, because on Monday, of course, you will all have canned Horton still, but the students who are going to be here live will be talking about writing and my life couldn't get any worse, the LEQ, the long essay question. Why are we doing a long essay question, Mr. Horton, when last year they only had the DVQ? 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is I don't know what the College Board is going to do for your AP exam. I do know that it'll be online, but I mean, they could do another format besides the DVQ. And 2, which Mr. Margrave and Mr. Williams will appreciate this, is that next year when you're taking AP American, the writing format for AP American is the same as AP Euro. Yeah, the point rubric is the same. And so I'm doing, let's just say that I'm doing Mr. Margrave's work and Mr. Williams' work. I'm sure they appreciate it, on teaching you how to write. And basically what you have to do is to tailor that to the rubric. And that's enough talking about that, because today is actually, even though this is for Monday, today is actually Friday afternoon. And like you, I want to go home. And, that's not the major influencer of my decision. So let's begin, shall we? Right there. Roman numeral 11. The philosophers wrote a lot about religion, but humanity was the center of their interest. The philosophers were thinking of men, by the way, not women. I hope that I got that through your heads over the last few sessions, that the philosophers, for all their preening and prawning about the fact that they were the great thinkers of the world, just saw women as, second-class citizens. Women were by and large not allowed to participate. And the philosophers felt that women could not be capable of serious research. They weren't smart, is what they thought. So the idea of social science, though, and you say, what's social science? Well, sociology is a social science. Political science is a social science. Psychology, perhaps, is a social science. But yeah, social sciences are the study of what groups of people tend to do. Notice I said tend to do. It's an inexact science, but a valuable study. Although my son Wes, when he went to UK and his freshman year, he took a course in sociology, and he remembered sitting in the hall down at UK. And in these halls hold 400 students. And the place was pretty full. And Wes said the first thing the professor said, there are no jobs in sociology. Any questions? And then went on. And I think Wes dropped the course that day. I don't know. Anyway, the philosophers hoped to end human cruelty by discovering social laws and making people aware of them. Those concerns are most evident in the philosophers' work on law and prisons. 2 separate entities, law and prisons. In 1764, Cesar Beccaria, whose name I've seen somewhere else, published a book called On Crimes and Punishments, in which he sought to make punishments effective and just. He wanted the laws of government to comply with the laws of nature. He attacked torture because prior to the Enlightenment, and to be honest, many places around the world today, if you are accused of crime, you can be tortured. They have a saying that when you travel to a foreign country, you're Bill of Rights protections dropped at the border. So he attacked torture and capital punishment as being cruel. Torture was routinely used to elicit confessions of crimes in many countries, including this one for a while. Torture was also meted out as punishments. The intent, Cesar Beccaria said that the intent of punishment should be to deter future crime. Is that a realistic claim given the amount of recidivism? I like big words and I cannot lie. Recidivism means repeat offenders, people who commit crimes and go to prison and then go back and commit the same crimes or other crimes again. Philosophers believed that mercantilism hampered the expansion of trade. Yes. Manufacture and agriculture. The leaders of this movement were Francois Quinet and Pierre Dupont de Nemours. The physiocrats believed that I should go to bed early. Believed that the primary role of government was to protect property and permit its owners to use that property frequently. They felt that all economic production should depend upon sound agriculture. The most important test question, guaranteed, slam dunk, better believe it, and oh yeah, there it was. Work of the Enlightenment was Adam Smith's Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Let's see. Yes, there we go. Adam Smith. The best vacation I ever took was with my son, Wes, in the year 2013. We spent, I know I've told this story before, 3 weeks between Ireland and the UK. And on the last weekend we were there, we took a train up from Manchester to Edinburgh, Scotland. And I saw this and I said, well, one day this will come in handy in my AP Euro class. This is a statue of Edinburgh native Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. And The Wealth of Nations, and I'm sure that I'm looking at a bunch of people who will one day major in business or business management or get an MBA or something of that nature, or economics or finance or something of that nature. And when you are freshmen, they will make you read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, because it's true then. It's true now as it was then. I hate that. It is true now as it was then. Mercantilism was a system that did not work, even though it caused many wars between many countries, caused many people to be brutalized, slavery. I'm sorry, guys. But yeah, it was Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations was just a logical approach to business. He believed that liberty was the foundation of a natural economic system. He said that the mercantilist system should be scrapped. Mercantilism, we talked about that before. Mercantilism, the goal of a country should be to accumulate power. Power is manifested through the accumulation of gold and silver. Mercantilism, a zero-sum philosophy, meaning that for one country to gain, one of its rivals must lose. Mercantilism, which held that colonies were meant to be tools of the mother country, only exist to serve the mother country. Whereas Adam Smith said, hey, there's enough out there for all of us. Okay. Smith argued that mercantilist regulations, like against smuggling in the United States, hindered the expansion of wealth and production. The assumption of mercantilism was that resources were scarce, and therefore some gained wealth at the expense of others. Zero sum. A zero-sum philosophy, I gain, Mr. Arlinghouse loses. Okay. He saw the resources of the world as endless. Now, here he was probably not quite correct, because we have, within the last century or so, began to realize that resources might not be endless. In effect, Smith said that the people of Europe need not be poor. And by the way, when it says, notice the people of Europe, he didn't mean the people of the world, he meant the people of Europe. Adam Smith, he was a nationalist. In effect, Smith was considered the founder of laissez-faire, which is a French word that's difficult to define. It literally means let alone. It means that the government should keep its hands out of business, mostly, not entirely. A limited role of government in business, not entirely. Hint, hint. He thought that the government, should provide schools to educate potential workers, should provide armies, navies, and roads that, would help business. Armies protect business, navies protect commerce. Meaning the government, should undertake dangerous commercial ventures, such as building bridges, such as building railroads, such as building dams that were so humongous that private companies could not take them on, you see. And so, Smith came up with the four-stage theory of economics, meaning that man evolved economically in these four steps. Number one, man was a hunter and gatherer. How are you, Mr. DeMaria?
I'm fine. How are you, Mr.
It's always good to see you. Number two, that the second stage of economics was pastoral, meaning that man learned to herd animals, and he settled down. He, in this early stage of hunting and gathering, that first stage, the mortality rate for children and for old people like this guy, not like Mr. DeMaria, he's going to live forever. Trust me. Was very high. Yeah. But when the man learned how to herd animals, to keep animals, his lifespan increased. And it increased even more when he learned how to farm. Agriculture, as Mr. Arlinghouse can tell you, is the most important invention mankind ever made. And don't say fire and don't say the wheel. It is agriculture. Agriculture will allow people to settle down, to have time to create. And finally, the last stage of economics is the commercial stage, where people actually begin making a living selling things. You see, that was a big step. Smith described the passage of human society through these stages as a movement from barbarism to civilization. Smith's theories allowed Europeans, though, to look about the world and always find themselves dwelling at the highest level of human achievement. You see, that's the thing. As we get into the age of imperialism, Smith's theories that there was enough for Europeans, pretty much as it says there, it allowed Europeans justification in their minds to just go out and dominate the other parts of the globe. When you think about it, in the next chapter or two, we'll talk about the Atlantic world colonization. Who invited the Europeans, for example, to go to Nigeria and start harvesting palm oil, or to, South America and start harvesting silver? And by the way, when they harvested silver, the work in harvesting the silver, mining, was done for free by Native Americans. So, the spirit of the Enlightenment presented themselves as carrying out a civilizing mission to the rest of the world. Yeah, and so one of the things they got, the Enlightenment thing, said, well, when we go to these other countries, by the fact that we're there, we're civilizing these savages. Something we'll later study, Mr. Arlinghouse, called the white man's burden. So, Roman numeral 15. The philosoph's greatest zeal for reform, though, lay in the field of politics, particularly in France, where, France, the richest country in all of Europe, was a hotbed of corruption, as it says there, where the corruptness of the royal court, the blundering of the administrative bureaucracy. Louis XIV was a strong king, an efficient king, not a good king. Louis XV was a bad king. Louis XVI was a bumbling fool. And he gets his head cut off. So, the foolhardy wars that France had engaged in, including the American Revolution. And in the American Revolution, remember that France loaned the fledgling United States the sum of 20 million livres of silver. You say, how much is that? That was enough to house and feed every peasant family in France for a year. Yeah. The most important political thought of the Enlightenment occurred in France. The French philosophers stood divided, though, as to the solution of France's problems. Important point, yeah. They weren't agreed. They said we can improve it, but they couldn't agree how. For example, the philosophes' solution, ranged from just aristocratic reform, keeping the nobility, keeping the king, but, just have some minor tweaks, minor reforms, to democracy. In other words, doing away with the king and instituting some kind of a parliament, to having a more absolute monarchy to where everybody does exactly what the king says. And so, yeah, Charles Louis de Secondat, also called the Baron de Montesquieu, and you just underline his name, was a lawyer, a noble, and a member of a provincial parliament, a local town council, and a member of the Bordeaux Academy of Science. He was he was rich. He was a member of the nobility, member of the privileged class. He was also an Enlightenment thinker. He lived in luxury, but still saw the need for reform in France. In 1721, he published the Persian Letters to satirize contemporary reform. You say, what does that mean? So he writes this book called the Persian Letters about these two Persian guys who go to Europe, and then they write letters back to their friends in Iran or Persia, describing Europeans and comparing what they did with Persian life and custom. And the point of it was to satirize, to make fun of the pathetic state of affairs in France. There was humor, but also cutting criticism and an exposure of the cruelty of that should be the irrationality. Exposure of the irrationality of much of contemporary European life. His most enduring work, though, was The Spirit of the Laws, which held up for the example of the British form of government as the wisest model of regulating the power of government. The Spirit of the Laws also, Montesquieu describes a government of three branches with separation of powers. Our United States of America is a direct grandson of the Enlightenment, the thinkers, their ideas. Of course, that's great, but the Enlightenment thinkers had no idea, no gumption that they would actually instill their reforms. The thing you have to take your hat off for in the 13 colonies, the United States, was that they actually took these theories and made them concrete. All right. Whether the best form of government was a monarchy or a republic depended, he said, on that country's size. Population, social and religious customs, economic structure, tradition, and for some reason, climate. I don't know. Montesquieu believed that France should retain a monarchy that, though, was tempered by some aristocratic, meaning him and others like him, local and other corporate entities that the monarch would have to respect. Montesquieu was a political conservative. He adopted conservation in hopes of achieving reform. Montesquieu did not, he said did not want a rebellion, a revolution like happened in the United States or would later happen in France. No, most of the philosophers didn't want to see a revolution as the way to change. They thought the country could change itself. Montesquieu, he believed that the degradations of French life could be blamed on the monarchy. He felt that Britain's example of division of powers, with a king in executive authority, legislator in the parliament, and judicial power in the court system, three branches of government, was the best operating example to follow. However, his perception of the British system was not accurate. He failed to see how patronage and electoral corruption, in other words, voting graft, allowed a handful of powerful aristocrats to dominate the government. I mean, so please understand that. Yeah, all the philosophers thought that Britain was some kind of a Enlightenment paradise, but it wasn't. It had flaws. I mean, for one thing, once again, say it with me now, until 1832, less than 5% of the British population could participate, vote, because the British had very strong property qualifications. So, failed to see how patronage. All right, he was also unaware of how the emerging cabinet system was slowly making the executive power a part of the parliament. Yeah, you see, in England or the UK to this day, they don't have a president, and they have a prime minister, but the prime minister is actually part of the parliament. He's elected from the parliament, and he comes from the cabinet. And so, yeah, so he was technically wrong. He felt that monarchs should be subject to the limits of governing and that a legislature should set those limits. JeanJacques Rousseau, my favorite, next to Thomas Jefferson. As it says there, he formed few close relationships except with women. And I'm being facetious and mean, but accurate. He sired many children whom he left to foundling hospitals. Yeah, we talked about that. However, I mean, he did. He would go around and he was like a bee. He impregnated all these women, snatch up the children, drop them off at a foundling hospital. And we'll learn about foundling hospitals in a couple of units when we talk about the Industrial Revolution or life under the old regime. Foundling hospitals were where newborns who had been cast off. And this was a common practice, that people were so poor that when they had a newborn child, sometimes they would simply abandon it to save the other children. And if the child was somewhat lucky, he'd end up in a foundling hospital. And in that foundling hospital, he had a 10% chance of survival. And JeanJacques Rousseau would go father children, drop them off at the foundling hospital, and go look for his next sexual experience. Once again, the philosophers were short on Judeo-Christian Muslim values of morality. So, however, Rousseau had a deep antipathy towards the world and the society in which he lived. He said, you need to be good, and I'll do that while I'm having X number of illegitimate children and dropping them off at foundling hospitals. In his discourse on the moral effects of the arts and sciences, he contended, the short title of that book is Discourse on Arts and Sciences. He contended that the process of civilization and enlightenment had corrupted human nature. In 1775, his Discourse on the Origin of Inequality, Rousseau blamed much of the evil of the world on the uneven distribution of property. Other philosophers felt that life would get better for people if they just had more material goods. Rousseau questioned what actually made the good life. His most comprehensive discussion of politics took place in a book called The Social Contract. Now, this is about to get confusing. Rousseau writes a book called The Social Contract. However, the idea of the social contract is born with John Locke. the idea that there exists between the government and the governed a contract. And in that contract, the governed, that's you and me, promise to obey the law, pay our taxes, and that's about it, actually. Die eventually. But the government promises in return for that to protect us. And hang on, John Locke, social contract, the government promises to protect us from foreign enemies, from the walking dead, each other, each other. But John Locke came up with something new. John Locke said it is the job of government to protect us from the government. And I don't know why I'm talking about John Locke right now because we're on Rousseau, but it had to do with the social contract. But John Locke said that in a contract, if one side breaks the contract is no longer valid. And so John Locke said, if the government fails to protect us from foreign enemies, from each other, but from itself as well, then the people, the governed, have the right to dissolve the contract, to dissolve the bonds that bind us. Sounds a lot like Thomas Jefferson, doesn't it? No coincidence. All right. Rousseau the Social Contract was a very abstract book that does not propose specific reforms, but outlines the kind of political structure that Rousseau believed would overcome the evils of contemporary society. I don't like Rousseau. Rousseau said, all men are born free, but everywhere they are in chains. That's his best quote. All men are born free. Why do I think of a movie right now with lion cubs? All men are born free, but are you laughing, Mr. Arlinghouse? All men are born free, but everywhere they are in chains. The rest of the volume is a defense of the chains of a properly organized society over its members. Rousseau suggested that society is more important than its individual members because they are what they are. The member societies are what they are only by virtue of their relationship to the larger community. In other words, you are what you are because of your relationship to your community. What are you now? You're a student. And if you didn't have the community, you wouldn't be a student. There wouldn't be a school. You'd be trapped in an episode of The Walking Dead. Rousseau, agreeing with Plato and John Calvin, said that freedom was obedience of the law. The law was to be obeyed, was termed the general will, and the will of the majority of voting citizens. Rousseau believed that the general will, thus understood, must always be right, and that to obey the general will is to be free. You say, what does that mean? Rousseau said that people should not revolt against their government, take up arms, violently revolt. Because that would violate the general will. You say, what's the general will? The general will is what is good for everyone. In a revolt, in a revolution, people get killed, homes are burned, businesses destroyed, property, it's bad. I'm going to finish. Rousseau would have disagreed with Adam Smith's major premise in The Wealth of Nations, which he might not have read, and would have preferred a study on the virtue of nations. Smith wanted people to be prosperous. Rousseau wanted them to be good, except for himself when he was fathering multiple children, even if being good meant they might remain poor. As a way of keeping people loyal and content, Rousseau suggested that a properly governed society should decree a civic religion based on the creed of deism. We're going to get back to deism soon, Mr. Arlinghouse. There's still hope for you to make that see. Many of the leaders of the French Revolution were avid readers of Rousseau. I mean, the man was popular for some reason. and were critical of the general tenor and direction of Western culture. And we will begin there next week. I will let you guys off on Tuesday, even though we need to keep progressing. But I'm gonna let you guys off on Tuesday because it's voter day, and I can't be in this building. But yeah, I'll be back Wednesday," said Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, hasta la vista, happy Halloween, and I'll see you.